You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is the unbelievable case of Laura Ackerson. Now this one is brutal and baffling in every way, and the twists and turns will make you think you understand what is happening, but it will be completely surprising every time you hear new information. And this is just one that I felt the need to share with you guys because this woman was one of the strongest women I have ever heard of, and her story deserves to be told. By the way, I post content like this all the time. It's my absolute passion to tell these stories, and for December I am doing Wicked Winter, where I'm posting the most wicked cases I can find, and I always try to be the most respectful that I can be. I never mean any harm or disrespect by telling these cases. I truly just want to tell the victims' stories. And so if that's something that interests you, I would love if you would subscribe, maybe thumbs up, and leave a nice comment down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2011 in North Carolina, and Laura Ackerson was a 27-year-old mother and wife living in Kingston. Now she was very creative. She had a natural eye for graphic design. She even went to school for art at one point, but she was more into raising her family in 2011. She had a husband who is 32-year-old Grant Hayes, as well as two children with him. That was 3-year-old Grant the fourth and 2-year-old Gentle Rain. Now she absolutely loved her children, and she was just a natural caregiver that would do absolutely anything for them. She seemed to be a very trusting woman who believed in the universe and that everything happened for a reason. She just seemed to have such a gentle, pure soul about her, and it was the most beautiful thing that I have ever read about or been able to hear about was who Laura was. She was even going to online school so she could better her education, so she could open a daycare where she could provide children with a better sort of education when they were super young. She wanted to teach them classes. She wanted to give them very healthy food. She just wanted to make such an impact on all of these kids that she could possibly help. Now Laura and Grant had met in 2007 when Grant was actually playing as a musician. He often went around to different bars and restaurants and played his guitar, and he was actually really good at it, and he was such a charming guy. And so after they met, they went on a few dates, and this was all kind of in secret. Nobody who knew Laura really knew that she was in this new relationship, and then suddenly she actually told them she was married to Grant, and they had gotten married on April 30th, which just happened to be both of their birthdays, which Laura thought was a sign from the universe that they were meant to be together. And they exchanged vows at the courthouse, and they were officially married. Now their children were very well mannered and respectful, even being young kids. Little Grant was such a leader, and his little brother Gentle would follow him around everywhere just to know what his big brother was doing, and they loved to be around each other. And Laura was so supportive of her kids, of her husband, of everybody she was ever around, and Grant loved that. In fact, Laura and Grant would work together on Grant's kind of musical career that he wanted to start. She would help him book gigs. She would even talk to the fans about him to kind of give him more publicity, more press, and kind of have a good name for him out there. By 2010, Laura had been through quite a lot in her life, which we will get to a little bit later, but this had made her quite the strong woman who kind of was coming into herself as far as being able to stand up for what she believed in and for what she didn't accept and didn't allow herself to be treated like. And her whole being, she was just really maturing in this way, in a way she had never before. She still had that gentle soul about her though, which was what made her so beautiful, because not only was she strong, she was also gentle, and a lot of the times people cannot be both, unfortunately. But she was determined to handle anything she had to give her kids the best life. So even though she had kind of suspected a falter in loyalty of Grant, she truly didn't understand what was happening until she would get a letter in the mail. This was in April of 2010, and she would get a picture of Grant with another woman at what appeared to be a wedding. And on the back, it had written on it, "Laura, we've never been married because I never signed the paperwork." Now immediately, Laura rushed to go get her marriage certificate because she believed she was married to Grant this entire time, and sure enough, Grant had never signed the papers, meaning they were never legally married. 3, almost 4 years they had been together, and their life was all a lie. At least that's how Laura felt. I mean, Grant had gone to Las Vegas with this woman named Amanda Hayes, who was 7 years older than him and also a widow with a ton of money. And the two had gotten married, even though Laura thought that Grant was her husband. Now, Laura was extremely shocked at this point, but that didn't stop her from moving out of the apartment she had been living in with Grant. She immediately packed up her stuff, took the kids, and moved into a different apartment. This apartment had a double security system. Not only did you need a key to get into the parking lot, you needed a key to get into the apartment complex, and of course the key to get up to her actual apartment. So it was very secured, and I think for the first time she was feeling like she was actually really doing something for herself and her kids, and she was doing what she had to. And although she was in a state of disbelief, this was something that she was still able to do and hold it together for those 2 boys. But Grant eventually came back to North Carolina and wanted to see the kids. He was with Amanda. He moved into an apartment with her, and they demanded to see the boys. And Laura was actually all for this. She said that it was better that the boys had their father and their mother, even if they were separated. She really saw how that could affect a little child's life. She worked most weekdays and he didn't work, so she figured that during the week the boys could stay with Grant, and during the weekends she could have the boys, and that would be an okay settlement that they could reach and they could do easily. However, Grant started to say that he didn't want her to have any custody at all. He didn't want her to ever see the boys, and that not only was she unstable, she was also abusive. And this is when Laura completely denied this and said that Grant was actually the one who had a drug addiction. At this point, Grant got full custody besides on the weekends when Laura would have visits with her boys, and a psychologist was actually brought in to assess the relationships with the mother and the father and their sons, and to see who really was the more fit parent for when the court date would come, which it would in 2011. And this psychologist would say from her findings when she would go in and just watch how how Grant and Laura interacted with their boys, she found that Laura was a very hands-on mother and that she was really okay with the split custody. She knew how it would affect the boys, and she wanted the best for them regardless if it wasn't what she necessarily wanted. However, Grant and Amanda were very set on Laura not being in the boys' lives at all, saying she was not fit to even have visits and really just dragging her name through the mud. However, it didn't appear that Grant and Amanda were exactly going to get what they wanted, because the psychologist really did see how great of a parent Laura was, and all of these claims by Grant and Amanda didn't really add up when people would actually go and watch Laura with the boys. You could just tell that she just naturally had that ability to be such a wonderful mother. She also appeared to be more level-headed and more stable as well, because she had a steady job, a steady income, where Grant and Amanda did not, and they had also just had a baby of their own named Lillian, and neither of them were really working at this time either. Now, custody battles are not quick, and so during this entire time when it was going through the whole process, Grant and Amanda were having to see Laura and have these visits and make sure that they were giving the boys some time with Laura, as well as having them in their home. And they really began to get hostile with Laura, and they didn't want her to come over. They truly tried to make her visits less and less, and when they would pick up the boys, they were very rude and demanding, telling the boys to, like, pulling them away, telling them let's go, and not letting them say goodbye to their mother while these boys were screaming and crying. And not only is it hard enough to have parents who are separated and from going to one household to another, but to be ripped away without being able to say a proper goodbye in a child's mind can be truly detrimental. And Grant was doing this to his own sons. Now, because of this and how Grant was showing that he was treating the boys even in front of Laura, Laura's kind of motherly instincts kicked in, and she wanted to see her sons more often. She knew that as they were so little, 3 and 2 is so little, that this was really going to have an effect on their attachment towards their mother later on. And so she contacted Grant and she said, look, I would really appreciate if we could kind of put out a little bit more time to say the goodbyes before you take the boys. That way they're not crying when they leave. And also, I would love to get weekend or weekday visits. So like Wednesday is the middle of the week. And at first, this was something that was actually happening. She would get them for a few hours and they would go to a place called Monkey Joe's, which from what I gathered is like a Chuck E. Cheese, bouncy house, trampoline park, just one of those places where the kids rush in and are playing for hours and hours, and you get them food and then they're exhausted and you go home and relax for a while. That's kind of what it seemed to me. But eventually, Grant started refusing these weekday visits and would no longer let Laura see them very often at all. At this point, Laura was stuck only having her boys on the weekends. There wasn't much she could do about it, so she just really was grateful for what she got, and she would make sure that the boys had the best time. She would take them out to do the most fun things. She would spend the most time with them that she possibly could to just kind of let them relax, because not only was it stressful for Laura, she knew it was stressful for her boys too. She would try to not show them that when she had them, but on the days that she didn't have them, she was really letting her friends in on how much of a toll this whole thing was having on her. It had gotten so bad that Laura had actually told her friend Heidi that she had had for several years, if anything bad happens to me, even if it's a car accident, know that he did it. He meaning Grant Hayes. Now, her friend Heidi was so shocked hearing this because she didn't realize how bad it really was and how terrified that Laura was of Grant. But upon hearing this, it made it very clear that this was deeper than just a custody battle. This was a fear deep inside Laura that something was going to happen, something bad. But would he really harm her? The psychologist that had looked at both Laura and Grant and Amanda and their parenting skills had said that Grant and Amanda kind of in essence wanted to obliterate Laura from their lives, from the boys' lives, which again just added to the thought that maybe Laura was right about being so afraid. But then it seemed like things were starting to actually get better, and it was July 13th. It was a Wednesday, and Grant had contacted Laura saying, hey, do you want to try these weekday visits again and come and pick up the boys later? And of course, Laura was ecstatic. She said, yes, as soon as I get done at work, I will come right over and take the boys. And she was so happy. And that day, she was actually working on a company she had just started named Fork and Spoons. It was like an advertising agency that would have the menus at restaurants where all the ads are placed. They would be the ones selling and placing those ads, and it was her and her friend named Siobhan Mathis, and they had met at a grocery store where Laura had once worked, and they had instantly hit it off. Now, Laura was more into the graphic design part, and Siobhan was more into the marketing, and so together they were just absolutely perfect. dream business partners, and they started up this company and it was going really well. That day, Laura had several different business meetings. They all went extremely well. She had told Grant, the last one will be at about 3 and hopefully I will be there soon after. Don't worry, I am coming. She was very adamant about the fact that she wanted to do this, and at about 4 p.m. she would head that way. She would call a friend saying that that's where she was going. She would call Grant saying that she was on her way. But after this, no one would see Laura again. Grant would send Laura an email that night saying, basically asking if she was still going to come pick up the boys. And she didn't answer this, nor did she answer the phone calls from Siobhan Mathis, who was waiting for her business partner to call her back and kind of fill her in on everything that happened that day. She didn't call, and then the next day, Siobhan actually emailed Laura saying, I know you didn't answer my phone call. You know, if something happened to your phone, I wanted to see if I could reach you here. Please answer me back, because of course Siobhan knew what was happening with Grant, and in the back of her mind was a bit scared for Laura. But again, Laura didn't answer, and Grant emailed again saying, you can take them through the week if you want, because they wanted to go to see Amanda's sister in Texas. So they were saying you can keep the boys through the weekend and through the week if that's what you want. However, we need to hear back from you. We haven't heard anything. And again, Laura didn't answer. And so by Saturday, the whole Hayes family, Grant, Amanda, and the boys and their daughter Lillian, all headed to Texas to see Amanda's sister, because nobody had heard from Laura. Laura's friend Heidi, whom she had told, you know, if anything happens to me, it's Grant's fault, was immediately scared for Laura and went on Laura's computer where she had stored so much information. You see, she had been collecting all of the emails that she would have back and forth with Grant, and she'd been keeping them in a separate folder in case something were to happen, and also the court date with a custody battle, just to have kind of that trail of information for the court. And so Heidi went in and downloaded all of those emails and immediately took them to the police station and said, my friend's missing. She's in a court custody battle, and this is all the information she has kept. I think something is wrong. And at the same time, Siobhan Mathis was also calling her apartment complex to ask the manager to go into her apartment and check on her, and the manager said she's not here. And at this point, Siobhan said, then I need you to collect all of the notebooks that you can find and bring them to me. And so Siobhan took these notebooks, went to the police station as well, and gave them the notebooks, because these notebooks had a record of everything that had been happening between Grant and Laura. She had actually written down not only their interactions, but everything she did with the boys, everything she fed to them, just anything possible to make sure that she was doing the right thing. She wanted everybody to know she was taking this custody battle very seriously. She wanted her boys, and she didn't want anything to interfere with that. Now, every single day, Laura would write in this notebook. She would collect these emails, yet these had stopped the day prior to her going missing and hadn't been written in since. Because of all of this information, having two people come forward, the investigators did take this missing persons report seriously, which is incredible. However, they immediately headed to Laura's apartment. They found, of course, she wasn't there, but also she hadn't been there in a while because her plants were actually dying. They hadn't been watered in quite some time. They then began to search for Laura's car, which was also missing. It was a 2006 white Ford Focus, and on July 20th, they would actually find it at an apartment complex that was it was parked in a parking spot, but it looked as though it had been rushed. Somebody had just flung in there and gotten out. The tires were turned all the way to the left, and they took it in for testing, of course, for fingerprints. And at the same time, they were also finding out what this apartment complex was, or what connection it had to Laura. And they found this was actually the apartment complex that she had lived in with Grant before she moved out, when she got that letter saying she was never married to him. Now, the car came back showing no fingerprints whatsoever, like none at all, like it had been wiped down. And also in her apartment, no fingerprints had been found there either, so they were left with nothing. The only thing they did know was that this apartment where the car had been left was only 400 yards away from Grant and Amanda's new place. Now, the surveillance footage at Laura's apartment where she was living at the time she disappeared showed her leaving her apartment at about 8 a.m. the morning she disappeared, and she was wearing a sleeveless top, capri pants, and carrying a duffel bag as well as a purse. She was headed out for her normal work day, but that would be the only time her apartment complex would catch her that day. She never returned. Now, Laura's phone records showed that the last person she called was Grant on July 13th at about 4 p.m. when she would have been headed over there, and also the GPS tracker on her phone last pinged in the direction of Grant's home as though she was headed there. But after that, nobody knew where she was, and she had never picked the boys up. They headed to Grant and Amanda's apartment with a search warrant, and the minute that they got there, they were basically ambushed by a smell of bleach. It was so strong, and that is when they noticed a huge bleach stain on the rug in the living room. And of course, this was very alarming, but then they started looking closer and looking further into the home, and they found that the bathroom, one of these bathrooms, had nothing in it. I mean, there was no rug, there was no shower curtain, there was no shower rod, there was no toilet seat cover. There was literally nothing in there. It was so bare, like it had been cleared out. They also found on the table a note that was written, or said to be written, on July 13th. That was in what looked to be Laura and Grant's handwriting, and it was basically Laura agreeing to give up full custody of her kids to Grant for $25,000. Now, everybody who knew Laura knew this was not something she would have ever done. She was fighting so hard for custody of her kids and to see them, and she wouldn't, as much as she wanted Grant in their lives, she would have still fought for both of them to have the rights. It was then found that surveillance footage at a local Walmart had caught Grant at 2 a.m. after Laura had disappeared, buying a saw and blades, and even asking an employee if they had bigger blades. He would also buy goggles and black tarps. And then a few days later, he would be seen again buying duffel bags, 3 red and 3 black. He would then go back to this Walmart and he would buy coolers and ice, and he would return 3 of those duffel bags. And these were all very suspicious, but nobody could really say that that made him guilty or a part of this case or not. This whole time this investigation was happening, Grant and Amanda were still in Texas with Amanda's sister, and so eventually they would come back, and the investigators, of course, wanted to talk to them. And Grant had said that the last time he had saw her was on July 13th. That Wednesday, she had come over for a midweek visit, and she had dropped the boys back off at about 9 p.m. and at this point Grant wanted to talk to her a little bit more about the custody. So Amanda took the kids into the other room and they sat down and talked for a while about the boys and the whole battle that they were going through, but she left about an hour later. He also said that when Laura first got there, Amanda kept all of the kids in the other room so they couldn't see her at first, which I thought was a very strange addition to the story. And this was so that Grant could talk to Laura about this agreement that she signed, supposedly, that said she would give them full custody for $25,000. But Grant said she left at 10 p.m. and then he tried to email her on Friday, July 15th, saying that she could keep the boys through the weekend and through the week since they were going to be in Texas, but she never responded, so he went ahead and went to the gas station where they would normally meet to exchange the kids, and she never showed up, so he left her some angry voicemails and he went ahead and went home. Now, investigators traveled all the way to Katy, Texas, which was where Amanda's sister Karen lived and where Amanda and Grant had gone to stay for a while. And they got there and they began to ask Karen do you know what happened? Do you know where Laura is? Is Laura here? And Karen said she was afraid that Laura was, and she took a minute to pray before telling investigators everything, saying that Grant and Amanda just came randomly, that they had always talked about visiting, but they didn't have any plans to do so at this exact time. They just called her, said that they were coming. And then when they got there, Amanda was kind of talking about that Laura was hurt bad, and then they were both asking the different family members if there was vacant holes, if there was wells, if alligators were in the area, if they ate humans, if there was pigs in the area, if there was vacant lots, just all of these very strange questions. Now, Grant had told everyone that he just was new to this area and wanted to learn more about it. That's what all the questions were about. But Karen suspected something different, and so she gave them a number to an attorney saying if something happened, you can get help. Please call and get help. She also found a machete, and she knew it wasn't hers, so she kind of hid it in the garage because she figured something was wrong, and this is what she would show investigators. Now, Karen had said that they had brought a lot of furniture and coolers, and she thought it was strange, but they also asked to borrow her boat to go out on a nearby Oyster Creek. And they did this taking the acid they had just bought, the muriatic acid, and they went out on this boat. And so, of course, investigators went to Oyster Creek to search, and what they found was more disturbing than what they could have ever expected. They found Laura, but it was just part of her. It was her torso cut in half with her head and her waist cut off. She had been dismembered. They also found her leg as well as her head, and her cause of death could not be determined, but it was thought that strangulation could have been part of it. Amanda and Grant were immediately arrested from Grant's parents' home where they were staying back in North Carolina, and prior to this, Grant was actually emailing his friends saying that this whole thing with Laura was quite a mess and that it was a lot bigger than he expected, and saying, "I need a damn good attorney if Laura don't show up soon," and telling all of his friends that he didn't know where she was, that she was missing, and that she was causing all of this drama once again. Now, investigators got in contact with the trash collectors from Amanda and Grant's apartment complex, and they actually found in these bags the missing items from the bathroom. Well, a lot of them. There was goggles, face masks, bleach-stained towels, gloves, women's pants, floor mats, cleaning supplies, and a vacuum. But the gloves would be what would help most in this case because they actually had Laura's DNA on them. Now, Grant pleaded not guilty to Laura's murder in 2013, saying that he was actually just the one that helped dispose of her body, and then Amanda was actually the one who accidentally killed her, and he just was covering up the murder to protect his wife. However, Amanda, on the flip side, said that actually she was the one that was helping Grant cover up his accidental murder, and that she was just another victim of Grant. Now, it was said once in Richmond, the couple first attempted to use muriatic acid to destroy Ackerson's body. When that didn't work, they took a boat onto Oyster Creek and dumped Laura's body parts into the water with hopes that alligators would eat her remains. Grant's defense said that basically Laura had come over that evening, had agreed to give up custody for $25,000, and after that Grant had gone in to get the kids, and Amanda and Laura were out by themselves, and Amanda had baby Lillian with her, and he said that he came out and she was on the floor already deceased by this point, and Amanda had told him that she had been holding Lillian when Laura asked to hold her, and Amanda just got up and ignored her, and at this point Laura kind of came after her, and she fought back in a way that she could, still holding the baby, and this caused an accidental death of Laura. And this was the story, that Grant saw her already deceased, thought about calling the police, but thought that they wouldn't believe it was accidental, and so he didn't. And so he only thought that he could help his wife by covering up the murder and dismembering her and disposing of the body. Amanda's daughter, Shay, who was in her 20s at this point, would actually testify against her own mother. And this was after Laura's friend Siobhan Mathis would go on the stand and would testify, saying how terrified Laura was of Grant, and that she had said that Grant was to blame if she had died. Now, Shay would come forward with information that would actually shock investigators with how much she was willing to say about what happened the day Laura disappeared or the day after. Now, she was not seeming to be on her mother's side or on Grant's side. She just was telling the truth. That's what she wanted to do. And she said the day after Laura disappeared at about 10 a.m., her mother, Amanda, called her and asked her if she would take the kids for the day out to play. And Shay was kind of iffy about the whole thing. She didn't really want to, but Amanda basically said, "I need you now." So Shay rushed over. She was about 20 years old at this point, living on her own, and so she rushed over to her mother's house. She went in, she picked up the boys, took them to Monkey Joe's for quite a while, and was actually going to take them home because the boys were tired, but eventually she called Amanda, and Amanda said, "No, we need you to keep them out for a few more hours," and so Shay did. Now, Amanda and Grant were allegedly trying to find a moving truck during this time because they were going to move back in with Grant's parents, as I've told you, and so they were really trying to get the process started, and that's why they had Shay take the boys, or that's what they told her. And so Shay ended up going back to the home at around 5 p.m. and at this point, Amanda said, "Can you go get your vacuum for me? Ours broke and we need a vacuum." So Shay had to go all the way back to her house, get her vacuum, and she actually picked up dinner for them as well and brought it back to their house. And Shay said she really didn't want to do all this, but she felt obligated to, so she did. She said a few days later she would be asked by them again if she would go into their home and help sell a piece they had sold on Craigslist. She was just going to be there to basically like mediate, hand the furniture piece over, and that would be it. But she went over to their house and noticed the extremely strong smell of bleach. Now, according to the Court Junkie podcast, Laura's brother Jason would actually testify as well because he was the closest family member that Laura had. He lived in the area at the time, and he would say that Grant had really been trying to put up a wall between him and his sister, and that one day he actually tried to go over to their house when they were living together and tried to just see his sister, and he could hear screaming from the inside of Grant saying that Jason was a bad influence, and Laura never answered the door, and she actually called him the next day to say basically, "Sorry, don't come over anymore, we're gonna have to find another place to meet." Now, allegedly after this, Laura was actually thinking about moving in with Jason to just kind of get away from Grant for a while. This never actually happened though, and 3 weeks prior to her murder, while this whole thing was happening, while she was telling her friend she was so afraid for her life, she had actually called Jason just to say she was proud of him. He had just opened a new business and she just wanted to give him some love. And he said this was strange, not that she was being kind, she was always kind, but just the fact that that's the only reason she called. There was no small talk, there was no talk about the boys, about anything else. She just was spewing love to Jason, and it almost seemed like a goodbye message, something that you'd want to say to get off your chest before you were no longer going to see someone again. Now, an inmate that was living in with Grant in prison at the time also came forward testifying, saying that Grant had told him that he was so sick and tired of the back and forth with the custody battle with the boys, and so he actually lured Laura over to his house where he would strangle her and then dismember her and then dispose of her in Texas. And Another extremely disturbing part of this case that happened during the trial was that they played a song written by Grant Hayes himself. He was a musician, and he had written a song after Laura's murder that was called Broomstick Rider, and it was about a baby mama of his 2 kids. And one of the lyrics even said, "I put a price tag on your head. You must have told your attorney I've got intentions on killing you." And as Grant listened to this in the courtroom, he was smiling, he was nodding along, he was like tapping his foot to the music, he was joyful. At this point, Amanda's sister Karen also testified, saying that she believed she knew a motive for why Grant and Amanda would have wanted to kill Laura, and that was that Amanda had told her that Laura had said that not only was she going to get custody of the boys, she was actually also going to try to take custody of Lillian. Now, this was the first time anyone had ever heard this, but Karen said this could possibly be motive for why they did what they did. But after 2 hours of deliberation, Grant was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Now this leads us to Amanda's trial, where she also pled not guilty to the actual murder, saying she was just a victim of Grant's and to what he had done, and that she only helped with the disposal of the body because she had been forced to. And Amanda also said that Grant had forced her to tell her own sister that she had actually been the one that killed Laura when it wasn't her. But unlike Grant, Amanda would actually testify in court. And these can actually be found on YouTube. I will link them down below. She said the night of the murder, she was taking care of the kids while Grant and Amanda talked about this settlement. She didn't really know what was happening or what this paper really had on it until she got closer. And that's when she saw the sum of $25,000 that Grant was offering Laura, and she got really mad because they didn't have any money. That's why they were moving back in with Grant's parents, and that she was just really hurt by this, that Grant didn't go through her to tell her all of this. But at this point, Laura would actually ask if she could hold Lillian that Amanda was currently holding, and Amanda, because she was angry, didn't answer. So Laura got up. She said that she tripped on a rug and kind of came coming at Amanda because of the fact that she tripped. And at this point, Grant kind of grabbed onto Laura. They had tripped over a few things, and it was more of an accidental death by Grant. Now, Amanda said at this point she had run back to the bedroom with Lillian to be with the boys, so she didn't really see what all had happened. But Grant had came in to tell her that Laura had been hurt. He was going to call an ambulance, but she needed to get the kids out of the house. Now, at this point, Amanda did as she was told. She said she took the boys to a gas station to get Slurpees, and then she got back to the home, and Laura's car was still in the driveway. So she decided that, she had just been taken by ambulance. And that is when one of the boys had asked to have food. So she took them to Chick-fil-A to play for a while and to eat. And then when she got back, Grant was in the house, and she had asked him what happened to Laura, and Grant said that she was fine, that she just hit her head. Amanda said the next morning she woke up and Grant was not beside her. He was gone, and she was trying to figure everything out, which is why she called Shay to go ahead and take the boys so she could handle everything. And then she actually had seen that Grant had emailed Laura and knew that she had never answered, and she decided that they would just go ahead and take the boys with them to Texas. And once they were in Texas, this is where Amanda said Grant finally told her that Laura was dead and that she needed to help dispose of the body. She helped him buy the acid and went on the boat with him, and said that she didn't actually see him disposing of Laura's body because it was dark. She was facing the other way, and she said the only reason she helped Grant was because he had threatened her as well as baby Lillian. Now, like I said, this entire testimony is extremely hard to listen to, because if you've ever been around somebody who is an extremely good liar, possibly even a compulsive liar, you can see the similarities in Amanda and what she does during this testimony. Now, she has on this very slow, childlike voice that you can just tell is put on, like for a show. And she was very meticulous about her answers, but she would also go on and on and on when it was just an answer that needed to be a simple yes or no. And you could tell she was just trying to paint herself in the best light with all of these answers, instead of just letting the answers and the facts prove that she either was guilty or not guilty. She just had to almost be in control of how the answers were being perceived. Now, the tears in her testimony only came out when she was talking about disposing of Laura's body, and it was very strange because you could only hear her shaky voice at some points. Now, she could easily contain it during the times where she was telling bits of information. It was like it was sucked up, like the tears were just gone. She could say it with a straight voice, and then the shakiness would come back again, and it almost sounded very fake to me. It sounded like there was not a continuous shakiness, there was no emotion to it at all. It was very forced, in my opinion. Now, only certain parts had like that exaggerated emotion where she was crying, and then it was followed by a quick shut off and an even tone of voice while she was explaining something. It just seems very strange and up and down, and with each new question, her previous statement was kind of changed. It was like her story would just go wherever the questions were going, but it never actually matched up to what she was originally saying. Again, I'm not an expert, but I have had a lot of experience dealing with compulsive liars, and the oddities that I found in her testimony kind of made me feel as though this is something that could have been occurring at the time, although I will leave the videos down below if you would like to listen to them and get your own feel for what you think was occurring during that time. But either way, Amanda was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 13 to 16 years in prison. Now, Grant's parents actually got full custody of all three of the children and were raising them together, and eventually Amanda actually divorced Grant from prison, and Grant actually tried to escape the very prison he was in as well. But many have trouble deciding who was really guilty in this case. Was it Grant? Was it Amanda? Or was it both? Were they working together? Now we're going to go back a little bit, because prior to all of this happening, in 2010, when Laura and Grant were just Laura and Grant, they were together, he started experiencing and expressing very strange behavior, and he would begin to take drugs, and he would have these thoughts. He would drink a lot. He would have these very strange ideals. He would often talk about creatures from other planets following him everywhere he went, because he was a time traveler, as well as the fact that the world was going to end in 2012. And this wasn't just because, that was something that was common, or he was just, trying to be silly. He truly believed this. He would say that all of the rich people would be down in the bunkers that would keep them safe, so he needed to make enough money to get on one of these alien ships that would keep them all safe as well. And he was also still being a musician at this time, trying to make money by doing that. And Laura was his manager, and he began to ask her to do very strange things, like talk to his fans about their sex life. This is also when Grant would become abusive, and at first it wasn't to Laura. In fact, one of the first times we know that he did something was to a bandmate. He had been late to practice, and this bandmate was giving him grief about that, and he pulled a knife on him. And Grant was also talking about having blackouts at this time during his behavior and just his outbursts that he really didn't remember afterwards. He was also isolating Laura from her friends and family, which we talked a little bit about before, but it was severe. She had to meet all of her friends and family at other places outside of the home, and one time Grant actually caught her with a friend and threatened both of them, saying that he was powerful and he would kill both of them. At this point, Grant was literally cheating in front of Laura as well, and he said he didn't care because he had asked her to have a polygamous relationship with him, and she had said no, so he was going to do it anyway. But after this, the kind of manipulation and the mental abuse turned into physical abuse. And during the time when Laura was pregnant with her first son, she was actually on the phone to her friend Heidi when Grant would abuse her because she wouldn't hang up the phone. And unfortunately, at this time, Laura wouldn't go get help. She wouldn't go to the hospital. She ended up with a bloody nose and a black eye. But like often in these situations, she didn't want anybody to know about it. Grant's own family was trying to get her out of the relationship, telling her that he was just going to try to pimp her out, that he wanted to just have kids with a lot of different individuals, like just all of these awful things they were saying about their own family member and telling her to get out of the relationship. They even told her to call Grant's ex-wife and get advice, and Grant's ex-wife basically told her to run. Now, fortunately, when the marriage photos of Grant and Amanda came, Laura took that as an opportunity to get out, and that is exactly what she did. Laura at this point was really working on herself. She could see that light at the end of the tunnel after that abuse that she had went through for so long, and she began to go to counseling. She was also joining groups for partners of sociopaths and trying to learn what exactly they did, who they were, and how to escape them, and how to get her children out of that situation as well, because he was their father, or he is their father. But that meant she was beginning to see through his mask, and he did not like that. He began to tell people that she was this horrible human being and that she was crazy. And he was also telling his friends to watch out who you have kids with, because this could be them, that this situation he was in could be them, because it was so horrible on his part. Grant had also began to email Laura in July of 2011 saying that he was angry with her, that she was always causing all this drama and creating so much of it that it was making it hard for everybody. And she was very adamant about not letting him manipulate her or talk to her like that anymore. And she had said that she records all of their conversations for a reason, so he couldn't get away with lies like that. And she even said, "Go ahead, build your story. You just give me the ability to prove you're a liar. Thanks. Keep playing your chess game, Grant. Thank God the courts are involved and they see people like you every day." Now, I also found an interview that had happened after all these trials when Grant was in prison. I mean, he still is, but it was an interview that I think really showed his personality a little bit more and kind of the switch that somebody like him can have while talking to somebody. And this interviewer really started out asking simple questions, really kind of siding with Grant, making it feel like he wasn't being attacked but listened to. And he was really talkative and kind of open and honest at first. And when the interviewer began to push a little bit more, saying that Grant didn't seem like he was remorseful at all and that he was smiling during the trial, why was he doing that, and just questioning him and pushing him more about that, you could just see how his friendly behavior kind of turned more angry, and that she didn't necessarily believe that he was innocent and that he was the sweet guy he was trying to show her that he was, and that she had seen right through him. And after this happened, Grant would not stop talking about it. Once he was questioned as to why he was doing all of that, he couldn't break that. I don't know, he wanted to make sure that she knew she hadn't won, if that makes sense. She was trying to ask him different questions, and he just kept saying, no, I want to talk about this some more. I have some more to say, because he knew he had been caught in that lie, you can say. And so you could just tell he was flustered. He wanted her to go back to when she believed him, and he wasn't getting that, and that infuriated him. He was focusing on why he was smiling, why he was dancing, why it seemed like he didn't care, and why all of that wasn't real, that he really cared. And the entire time I could hear the manipulation through the fact that no words of emotion were actually expressed. He was saying actions that were happening and saying kind of as though he wanted to have those emotions and knew that that's what she wanted from him, but he couldn't express it because he didn't know how. And This is something we see a lot, in the fact that these kind of individuals can really learn kind of the speak of a therapist, how they talk and what they want to hear, and they can continue to talk like that and make people believe them, when in fact, if you really listen, they're only repeating what they've heard, not what they feel, which is a big difference. I've said this before, but these are when the individuals have learned this behavior through life in order to better manipulate later on. And it's something that they can be extremely good at if you don't know the signs and don't know what to look for when someone is manipulating you. I also found that Grant was quite detached from the whole situation. I mean, he was calling his youngest son Gentle her son, as in Laura's son, like not wanting to attach Gentle to himself, but he was also calling his oldest son Grant his son, but like not talking about the fact that it was also Laura's son as well. He was just kind of had this skewed perception of who these boys belonged to and who had actually birthed them. He also had a very dominant behavior towards the interviewer the entire time. I mean, he corrected her, he talked over her, and this was especially bad when he was caught in his lie. Now, Laura herself began to call Grant a sociopath before her death, and many believe that this is true. Many also believe that Grant could be a narcissist. In my experience, these two can go hand in hand, but I want to tell you a little bit about narcissistic personality disorder in order for you to kind of come up with your own opinion on whether you think that he had that, and then we'll go into being a sociopath as well. Now, narcissists normally have a sense of self-importance, as though they are better than everybody else. They also have dreams of unlimited power. They want to be the most powerful in the room, in the country, ever. They demand that amount of authority. Now, they also lack empathy for others. They don't ever think of anybody else when they're doing something. It's all about them. They also believe they are extremely special in some way, and they take advantage of others because they will do anything to get where they think they deserve to be. Now, they also have an inability to handle criticism and will often show that kind of irritability or anger when they are criticized. But a sociopath, now, they cannot keep constant work. They repeatedly lie about everything they can, even if you think that's a stupid thing to lie about. It's just how their brain works, unfortunately. They also are horrible planners. They don't plan anything. They are irritable and aggressive, and they are irresponsible. They lack remorse as well. And they even justify the harm that they have done because they don't see any wrong in it. So they will say, oh, well, you know, I killed this person because they were doing this, even if it's just something small and minute, like, oh, they cut me in line, that's why I killed them. And they don't have that correlation of that is not okay at all. And they also cannot be faithful for more than 1 year, which I thought was a very strange kind of symptom or trait that sociopaths have. And both a sociopath and a narcissist, they can both be extremely charming to the point where they will fool you until you are at a place where you rely on them, and then that's what causes you to stay with them, even though they are controlling and they are abusive and they are horrible people to be around. You almost feel this need for them, even if you weren't a needy person to begin with, they can make you that way without you even realizing. But on one hand, a narcissist isn't always manipulative because they do care more what people think about them, and that is because of their own pride and their own need to be admired. And so they will kind of falter with being super manipulative, but sociopaths are very different in that way, and that is because they wear a mask everywhere they go. They don't care what people think about them because they don't even know who they are. It's almost like they are just like chameleons that just switch faces for different people, and they don't have a certain one. So if you don't like one, they'll just put on another, and it's something that they're good at, and they have no pride. They don't care if you like them or not, and that's what makes them scary. They know just how to trick you. They know how to do it well. They don't care what you think about them. And once they are done with you, once you are no longer a piece on their chessboard, they completely throw you out. You're done. They want nothing else to do with you. They are users of people and their emotions, because sociopaths don't have any. I truly do believe that Grant could be either or could be both. I see a ton of behaviors just in this case, and I'm sure there were even more red flags just in his everyday life. And I'm no professional by any means, but I'd love to hear your opinions on that as well and what you believe. Grant was actually found to be writing a script for Laura's press conference before her body was even found, and he was writing down what emotions he would use, what he would say, like emotional words to kind of coerce the public into feeling bad for him and pleading for Laura to come home. And I just feel like Laura knew exactly what kind of person she was dealing with by the end, and she tried to tell people multiple times. I mean, someone who writes down every single detail of an interaction with someone shows that that person fears the other. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can say that that was because she was going to court, but she was so meticulous about it. Not only were the emails in a separate folder, she was writing down every single piece of information that she could about him and their interactions. And this truly just tells me that she knew who she was dealing with. I mean, the fact that she even told him that she had seen through his lies in that email says so incredibly much. And I think that documentation of this kind could very easily mean that Laura knew or feared that she wouldn't be alive to tell the truth, and so these written words were her next hope that somebody would listen, that he was guilty. I mean, she spoke up so often to her friends. She was in support groups asking for help. She was trying to get help and trying to get her boys away from this man, and she wasn't just lying down and letting him do whatever he wanted her. She was trying to overcome this, and unfortunately that's not what happened, because no one gave her that help, which I'm sure it was extremely hard for Laura. She went from being abused and wanting to hide his behavior from the world because she was dealing with it, to wanting to expose him to everybody and trying to make them notice what was happening. And she was begging the world to see this man as who he really was. When they did, it was too late for her. Thankfully, they are both in jail, Amanda and Grant. But this poor woman who had overcome so much and had so much strength in her mind and in her heart, she had such a horrible, brutal ending. Over what? Not that murder and killing is ever okay. Not that death is ever an easy thing to, I'm sure, experience, but also deal with for the living. But it just shows a different kind of evil, that they could dismember her body. That to me is just the ultimate. You have to be extremely messed up to be able to do that. And the fact that they were then asking to feed her to the pigs or the alligators, I can't even imagine how her kids are going to deal with that knowledge when they get older. But I'm grateful that they're out of reach of their father, honestly. But I do want to say that this whole case kind of talks about domestic abuse and violence, and even if it's mental abuse, that is still something you shouldn't have to go through. So if any of you are going through it, I will leave a hotline down below, and please know that there are people out there that understand what you're going through, that believe you, and that will help you. This is not something that should make you afraid of getting help. This is something that is detrimental, that you ask for that help over and over. You ask for help, even if it takes a while, because you deserve that. And I don't want this to happen to you. I don't want you to ever have to endure any sort of pain. I don't want you to have to be a warrior and strong and go through so much, because yes, it makes you strong. And yes, Laura was a wonderful woman who was truly a warrior, but please don't feel like you have to be one every single day. Don't feel like you have to go through that, like you deserve it, or like you can't get better, because you can. And I want you to, and I need you to. So if anything, do it for me, even if you don't feel strong enough to do it for yourself or your kids or anyone else. I just wanted to add that in here because I truly do think sometimes we can't see the signs when we're in the situation. But if anything about this case stood out to you as being something you're going through, please get out. Please, even if it doesn't seem that bad, it is that bad, and you need to run. You need to make sure that it doesn't escalate, and you don't deserve to put up with that. So yes, don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.